Hi, my name is Robert Foran, and I'm a lecturer at San Jose State University in the Environmental Studies Department. I teach in support of our environmental justice minor that we offer in the department, and I'm very happy to be with you all today. I became interested in my research topics mostly through my participation in environmental social justice activism in Santa Cruz County, where I had lived presently, at the time when I was pursuing my degree in environmental studies, my master's degree in environmental science. And it was a really difficult time. There was a lot of issues with ICE infiltration in our community, especially our Latinx communities here. We have high concentrations of Latinx community members in like Beach Flats and all through like the southern part of Santa Cruz County, Pajaro Valley, and Watsonville. And so because of the administrative decisions made by the prior presidential administration, there was a lot of infiltration into the Latinx communities. A lot of people were being basically stolen from their homes as soon as they woke up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to head into their service industry jobs or their agricultural jobs. And so there was the response for that was sanctuary cities, which was sort of like a nationwide sort of response throughout the United States. However, here in Santa Cruz County, we were really trying to focus on creating more of an ordinance or a piece of legislation that would actually deem Santa Cruz County or the city of Santa Cruz as a sanctuary city. And that was highly problematic because the city council at the time was not really on board with that, nor was a large part of the white demographic, to be honest. People think that Santa Cruz tends to be a very, progressive city, but actually it's quite conservative and well over 60% white identified as far as this demographic. So we decided to form a board, a Sanctuary Santa Cruz board, and we got involved in various projects, like starting an after-school program, a so-called high school that sort of explored the voices of youth because there was a lot of voices coming to the table about, from adults, like young adults within the Latinx community, but not enough. We wanted the young people, we wanted to hear their voices. We thought that was so important. So we collaborated with community partners from Watsonville and Pajaro Valley and folks within the Latinx community and those here in Santa Cruz City proper, and with other organizations, community-based organizations like the Watsonville Brown Berets, which is they're an amazing community-based organization, have a very rich history in the Bay Area and all through the Central Coast here and in Southern California overall. So I got involved in a lot of activism and going to board meetings and getting involved more sort of entrenched or embedded within the community. And I decided that I needed to focus on my own experience in activism. But what sort of set it apart really for myself as an educator and as a researcher and as an activist were this white lens, which activism was really being sort of focused through or sort of this sort of very narrow scope. And I kept on running into the various comments or replies or responses or disappointing responses about this idea of trying to activate the community, which centered around whiteness, the experience of white folks conservative white folks that sort of touted their progressivism, but really were quite conservative. And the way that this white saviorism and this lens of whiteness was really cast over this idea of what really needed to be done. And we as white folks knew better, right? So needless to say, that created a lot of schisms and problems within the activist community. And so I wanted to focus on building coalition, right? So I said, well, let me start looking at issues of coalition building practices, building of community capacity, community resiliency. What is this chasm? What is this schism that we're experiencing? So I decided to focus on qualitative research and exploring the ideas of what it meant for a white identified individual getting involved, their experience in environmental justice and social activism in Santa Cruz County as a white identified person, right? So what is that about? I wanted to know. I know what it was about for me, but I can't, speak. We're not a monolith, right? So I wanted to explore that. So that really became a very strong focus for me in my research for my master's thesis. So that directly informed when I was asked to come back and teach after I graduated in the environmental studies department. I was asked to teach the environmental education course and the Intro to Environmental Thought and Philosophy course. And as I was looking through the syllabi, the past syllabi that was utilized and that various approaches in the syllabus and the teaching, I was really overwhelmed at the white lens. I mean, we those of us who work in this idea of like critical race theory and critical whiteness theory, we see this, but until you start seeing like materials that other instructors use and other educators use to teach within in the field of environmental studies, which we know is one of the least diverse disciplines in STEM, right? You start seeing the history of eugenicism come through, the eugenicist sort of view of the fathers of environmentalism, Aldo Leopold, Thoreau, Muir, the whiteness of Earth First, right? All these environmental movements that really sort of sidetrack the environmental issues, which are most vulnerable populations, which will be our BIPOC identified communities, right? Which they bear the brunt of the brunt of that history, the weight of the burden of that weight of history. So I decided that I just needed to recalibrate the syllabus because it was just taught through a white lens, and I really have to be careful because, I'm a white guy, right? I'm teaching environmental justice. So who should be teaching environmental justice and social justice? Should it be white people? Should it be white cisgendered white men? Maybe I should be teaching white kids. I don't know. I think it's really overwhelming demographic of my students are BIPOC identified. So I have to work with the tools that I'm giving and then I have to develop new tools. So that really is what brought me to my being very self-critical, being very reflexive and questioning everything that I'm doing and my motives, right? Because I participate in these structures, because just I call it the unbearable whiteness of being, right? This idea of like a white man teaching issues and about issues and environmental issues and social issues, which impact the most vulnerable communities, which most often are BIPOC identified. So it's the idea of trying to be very cautious and very intentional with how I talk and how I teach. Well, our current social and political landscape is very complicated, very complex series of issues. I think that I know that from at least through the lens of my own experience, that this work is very nuanced. It's very sensitive, right? There is this sort of idea of how do I, as a cisgendered white LGBTQ identified educator, activist, youth leadership activist sort of enter the work. And so I'm constantly getting my cues from the folks I'm accountable to, right? My students, my partner of 12 years, who is a brown immigrant queer man from the Philippines, right? So we have those sort of accountability people we're accountable to, and other folks that I'm accountable to, BIPOC identified folks I'm accountable to in my professional world and in my personal life. I think it's so important that we, as white folks, listen, right? We need to be able to listen and take in information, and if we're lucky enough to find amazing folks in our life that we can bounce ideas off of and for them to share their experiences with us, I think would better prepare us as educators or activists or researchers to sort of enter that socio-political landscape, right? So the more that we listen and we incorporate what we hear those narratives, those stories, those experiences, I think better equip white identified educators, researchers, and activists to participate more holistically in making change. Because if we don't listen, if we think we know, if we assume that we know something that we apparently do not, then that's where we have problems. Presently, I teach Environmental Studies 158, which is an environmental education course. It's mainly a content course, but meaning that we fulfill the content of trying to teach ideas about ecological literacy and ecological issues, climate change, drought, things which are sort of like intrinsic to California, but also experienced globally. But it's the course I teach right now is really required by most of my students are CHAD, like childhood and adolescent development majors who are on the teaching track, and then liberal studies majors who are also on the teaching track. So they have to take my course in order to graduate, which is great. Like I'm glad I get all these amazing students. And but a lot of them come in not really knowing too much about ecological issues. Like they know a lot about they know what certain ecological issues, which are like most prominent, like in media and on social media and in the news, like, but they're not really too savvy on the intricacies and how social issues are connected to the environment, right? So I really teach my course through the lens of a more holistic lens, and I see it in a framework of environmental and social justice education, so that there's an inextricable connection between humanity, human beings, and our world, our ecological world, our natural world, our natural environment, and our built or manufactured or social cultural environment, institutional environment, our institutions of our economic institutions, our educational institutions, our political institutions, all of that encompasses our environment, not just rocks, trees, stars, and rivers, which are extremely important. But because we interact with them, in environmental studies is a study of that relationship between humanity and the environment, I would be remiss not to teach environmental education through this pedagogical lens of trying to tie up like how to teach, how to work with this relation that we have with our environment around us. And because I think I teach it, like I'd say about 97% of my students are BIPOC identified or would probably self-identify as Black, Indigenous, or POC, that it really helps bring students into it, because we know that the myth is that, oh, students of color just aren't interested in environmental studies. Wrong, that's incorrect. They're very effective, probably more concerned, and in many different ways, than white identified students coming into environmental studies that tends to focus on studies around the physical environment, like water quality and wildfire management and animal species, habitat restoration. Whereas for a lot of the BIPOC students, because they come from vulnerable populations that experience the biggest impact from what's happening in our world with climatic change and global warming, and that's their entry point, that's their portal, right? So it's good that I feel like it's good that I have to seat that class within an environmental justice and social justice framework, because it invites all my students in, right? I can't be exclusive. We can't teach about snowy plovers and the hydrological cycle and not introduce a broader spectrum of what that means in the context of humanity, how we interact with the environment. Number one, listen. Listen to your students. Also, and this could be that I teach in the environmental studies department, which is seated within the College of Social Sciences, right? So we're talking about the humanities, the sort of soft, squishy, sort of like the human factor, right? So maybe my experience comes from that sort of fundamental basis. So maybe what I say may not apply all of what I say might not apply to like, you know, computer science. I mean, I don't know, like that's not my field of study, but you have to listen to your students, right? And what I mean by listen is not just listen to what they say or what they tell you, but listen to what's behind what they're saying, right? Listen, be aware of their facial expressions, their needs, ask them what they need. What's the best way that you learn, right? I mean, I teach a pedagogy course, so, or environmental education, right? A content course that through this lens of pedagogical approach. So like, how do you learn? What's the best way? What do you want to read? Like I give my student choices of what they want to read. They have a bevy of choices throughout each quarter within the semester to read certain articles and peer-reviewed articles and to watch certain videos and to explore issues that are of interest and that impact them the most, right? I don't want to take them down a road of teaching them about something that they will never look at again or don't care about, right? They need to know, I need to know what they're interested in. So I approached my curriculum, when I developed my curriculum for this course and these lesson plans, I try to be as all-encompassing as possible and as flexible as possible, especially during remote instruction. I mean, we all need our deadlines. We all need, you know, a beginning, a middle, and an end, because it helps us sort of like get anchors us in where we are, right? But we also have to be flexible with that. You know, be flexible, listen to your students. Don't always talk, you know, let them speak. Let them take the lead. And those are hard things too, I think, for me in my experience. Our education system overall, higher academia and K through 12, it's really not built to foster skills of leadership or self-efficacy or resiliency, community capacity, right? They're not built for that. It's built to create these little clones of young people that regurgitate knowledge to you know, we use standards as a level of achievement instead of purely as a diagnostic tool, right? So we have to relearn how to teach. And part of that is listening. A huge part of that is listening and finding out what they need and running a democratic classroom, right? We live in a democracy. Okay. I think we live in a nation that aspires to democracy. Do we live in a democracy? No, I don't really think so. I think that we have certain democratic protocols in place that really make us feel that we are participating in one, that we aspire to one. It's a process, right? So I try to run the classroom in the same way, or try to, I don't want to say run, try to facilitate and create the space or hold that space so we can create democratic processes of our own, agreements of our own. I take votes. We all listen, you know, talk to each other, listen to each other. Albeit very difficult in a remote platform. It's better in person, but at least you have to give students an opportunity to tell you what their needs are. You know, it's that simple. The idea of a democracy within the classroom has a lot of different moving parts, right? And so this idea of definitely having agreements, listening to, like, the first day of class for me, you know, outside of going over the syllabus and the requirements and the expectations for our students, we have to create spaces where our students can talk about themselves, you know, sort of, and just a little bit beyond, the idea of, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a CHAD major, and I'm graduating in the spring, and I hope I really like this class. Okay, we need to open the space to talk a little bit more about their aspirations and to give a little bit more sort of find the humanity in our students and ourselves as educators, and also hold the space for when we have traumatic things happen in our lives, right? So yesterday, So we all know about Atlanta. We know about the shootings in Atlanta, right? And for me, as a person who's married to a, a person of Asian descent and who's an immigrant, brings up a lot of stuff for me, as it does obviously for him, right? And we have lots of friends within our social circle and our professional circle who are or of Asian descent who identifies Asian or Asian American. I have a lot of students in my class who are Asian, right? So, once we check in with each other and say, how is everybody doing? What's been happening? Then just to open the space and, hey, what happened yesterday? Did anybody hear about this? And then somebody speaks up about that, the shootings, and then taking people's temperature, right? Part of running a democratic classroom is finding out how people feel, what's happening inside their head and their heart, and what are they feeling inside their body, right? There's this, a lot of my students have this very visceral body-centered response or reaction of fear and anger and closed-mouthedness, right? They didn't really want to talk about it. They would put it in the chat, but they couldn't speak because they were so upset they could not speak, right? So this idea of being able to open the space, and I don't like using the word holding the space, but fostering a space or creating a space where people can speak their heart and their mind and tell us what's happening inside their bodies. And that encourages a democratic feel in the classroom and sort of lends a fundamental basis to democratic processes in the classroom, because you're honoring the humanity of everybody in the room as much as possible as an instructor, right? So, and allowing people to speak their mind, which is part of a democracy, right? What did Warnock say, right? The idea of democracy is that the people have spoken, right? That's democracy. So if you allow the people to speak, if you hold space and create a space where people can speak, that in itself is the driving force of democracy, especially within the classroom. And I would argue probably for most things, it could be applied to most situations. Listen to the people. It's different now, I think, in remote instruction. I think the work-life balance was a little easier when we had in-person classes, because there's a lot of things that are missing in our remote instructional world, this idea of virtual time versus reality. And I think that to be able to sit in front of a group of young people and to read their body language and see their facial expressions and to share that energy, I think in and of itself can be healing, right? The human factor. And I think now, for myself at least, I'll speak for myself, in remote instruction, that human factor has now been taken away. Not completely, but definitely has been taken. Many elements or components of that healing, being able to sit in my office with office hours with a student who's breaking down crying because of whatever personal issue they may be going through, and be able to just hold the space and just be there with them, bear witness to their pain or their joy or their indifference, I think is a huge component of maintaining work and life balance. Because then when you exit the room, there's ways of transitioning through that, where remote instruction, that's really not possible. I know for myself, I'll carry my computer upstairs. I'm like, oh, I've got to return that email. You don't really escape it. There's that. So I know that my meditation practice, which is one of the things I utilize for sort of keeping myself focused, has become a little bit more rigorous now than it was before. I do different methods. Like sometimes it's a walking meditation. I go hiking. Sometimes it's sitting. Sometimes just getting outside to walk. We're very fortunate to live on the UCSC campus. My partner is the provost of Porter College, so we have access to redwoods and trails. So it's really good to sort of decompress and sort of bathe in nature, and sort of just let the earth sort of take that from us and to transform it, transmute it. Other people aren't that lucky. A lot of people don't have access to green space or safe space, let alone green space. in order to do that. It's better in person. It's better telling them that they're a freaking amazing human being in person, or that I see you in person, or that let's do a breathing exercise in the beginning of class, right? Breathe. I used to have them stand up, breathe 3 times, and scream at the top of their lungs and bang their desks, especially mid-semester when they're all doing midterms, right? Just get it out. And they all look at each other like, that's crazy. I said, do you feel better? Yeah, well, there we are. Maybe we should do that more often. Let's do it outside. I did get a complaint from one of the professors, though, from the classroom next door, so I felt bad about that, but oh, well, sorry. But yeah, getting them outside, I can't wait to go back in the fall.